Have you ever woken in the middle of the night and felt it? That cold certainty that you're not alone. The silence pressing too heavy, the shadows clinging too close, as if something waits just beyond your sight. Imagine lying in bed, knowing that beneath you, in the darkness where your eyes can't reach, something is breathing. Not a dream, not your imagination, something real. Tonight, we step into a story that will make you question every creak of the floor, every whisper in the dark, and what might be waiting under your bed when the lights go out. Emily had never felt so relieved to sign a lease. The apartment was small, the wallpaper faded, and the pipes groaned whenever the heat kicked in. But it was hers. After months of crashing on friends' couches and stressing over money, she finally had a place to call her own. The landlord had warned her about the creaky floors and the thin walls, but she told herself she could live with that. She dragged in the last of her boxes, sat on the edge of the narrow bed that came with the unit, and whispered to herself, "It's not perfect, but it's home." The air inside was cooler than it should have been, carrying a faint musty smell like damp wood left too long in the dark. She tried to ignore it, opening the single window to let in the night breeze. Outside, the city hummed faintly, a comfort against the silence pressing in around her. As she unpacked, she couldn't shake the feeling of being observed, as if the shadows in the corners leaned a little too close. Still, exhaustion won. She crawled beneath the thin blanket, pulling it tight to her chin. The mattress sagged slightly in the middle, dipping lower than she expected, almost as though something underneath shifted to make room. The first night was the hardest. Emily lay on her back, staring at the cracked ceiling, listening to the occasional hiss of the old radiator. The hum of the city had dulled to silence, and in that silence she realized how unfamiliar the apartment truly was. Every creak of the floorboards made her tense. Every whisper of wind against the window sounded like a voice trying to get in. She pulled the blanket tighter, telling herself, "It's just the building settling." Old wood, old pipes. Her eyelids grew heavy, but then it came, the faintest sound from beneath her bed, a slow dragging scrape, like nails grazing across the wooden floor. Her eyes shot open. She held her breath, waiting. The sound stopped. For a long moment there was only silence again, and she almost laughed at herself. "Get a grip, Emily," she muttered into the darkness. But her voice sounded too loud, like it didn't belong in the room. Rolling onto her side, she squeezed her eyes shut, trying to force sleep. Yet the weight of the silence pressed harder, and the thought wormed its way in. What if the sound hadn't been the pipes? What if it had been something waiting, just inches below her? Over the next few days, the unease refused to leave her. Emily tried to settle in, convincing herself that the first night's sounds were nothing but nerves. Yet little things began to gnaw at her peace. Her shoes, which she always placed neatly by the door, would be angled differently in the morning, as if someone had tried them on and set them back without care. A hairbrush she left on the dresser ended up beneath her pillow one night, tangled with strands she swore weren't hers. She told herself she was just distracted, maybe misplacing things while unpacking, but deep down, the excuses didn't sit right. At night, her sleep grew restless. She would wake to find her blanket pulled down to her waist, though she remembered cocooning herself tightly before drifting off. Once, she jolted awake with the distinct feeling that something had tugged at the edge of the sheet, gentle but deliberate, like a child testing how far they could pull before she noticed. Her heart raced as she scanned the shadows, whispering, "It's nothing, it's just me." But even as she spoke the words, she couldn't shake the crawling sensation at the back of her neck that someone, or something, was moving in her room while she slept. It happened on a Tuesday night, when Emily dropped her pen and watched it roll lazily across the floor before slipping beneath the bed. She sighed, kneeling down to retrieve it, annoyed more than anything. But as her fingers reached into the dusty space, the dim glow of her bedside lamp cast a weak light into the shadows, and that was when she saw it. Something pale darting back. Not dust, not fabric. A hand. Thin, greyish skin stretched too tight over long fingers, the nails dark and chipped, retreating as though startled by her presence. Emily froze, her hand suspended in the air, her heart slamming against her ribs so loudly she thought it might give her away. She blinked, squinting into the darkness, whispering, "Hello. Is someone there?" The words left her mouth before she could stop them, and the silence that answered was thick and unnatural. Forcing a nervous laugh, she backed away quickly, telling herself she was imagining things, that her tired eyes had played tricks on her. Still, she shoved a box under the bed to block the space, unable to shake the memory of those fingers curling back into the dark, as if waiting for her to reach again. That night, Emily left every light in the apartment burning, as if the glow itself could keep her safe. But when the clock crept past midnight, the familiar unease returned, heavier than before. She lay stiff under the covers, ears straining against the silence, and then she heard it, slow, measured breaths, rising from beneath the mattress. It wasn't the hum of pipes or the shuffle of a neighbor upstairs. This was close, too close. Her pulse quickened, and she pressed a trembling hand over her mouth, terrified that even her breathing would be heard. The sound shifted, low nails scratching the wood, dragging back and forth in lazy, deliberate strokes. Her eyes darted to the floor where the shadows thickened around the bed frame. The air grew colder, heavy with something unseen. Just as her eyelids began to sting from not blinking, she heard it, a laugh. Soft, broken, like someone choking on their own amusement. The sound crawled under her skin, and she couldn't stop herself. "Who's there?" she whispered into the dark. Silence. No answer, only the ragged sound of breath beneath her bed. Emily pulled the blanket over her head, trembling, knowing in her gut she wasn't imagining it anymore. Something down there was real. By the third week, Emily couldn't keep the fear bottled up any longer. Over coffee with her neighbor, an elderly woman named Mrs. Calloway, who lived 2 doors down, she finally let it slip. I think something's wrong with my apartment." Emily whispered, her hands wrapped tight around the warm mug. Mrs. Calloway's lined face stiffened, her lips pressing into a thin line. "What kind of wrong?" she asked, voice low. Emily hesitated, embarrassed by how absurd it sounded. "At night I hear breathing under my bed. Scratching. I even thought I saw," she broke off, shaking her head. "It sounds crazy." But Mrs. Calloway didn't laugh. Instead, her eyes darkened with recognition. "You're not the first to say that." The words froze Emily in place. Mrs. Calloway leaned closer, lowering her voice. "The last girl who rented your unit left in the middle of the night. Packed her things and never came back. She told me something lived beneath the bed, something that wasn't human." Emily's chest tightened, her skin prickling cold. What happened to her?" she asked. Mrs. Calloway only shook her head, staring into her tea. "She never spoke of it again, and I suggest you don't either." That night, sleep came in broken fragments. Emily jolted awake around 3 in the morning, her body heavy, her chest locked as though invisible hands pressed her down. She tried to move, but her limbs refused her. Panic spread like fire in her veins. The room was silent except for one sound, the slow creak of wood bending beneath her mattress. Something was crawling there, just inches below her body. The bed lifted slightly, then sank, the way it would if someone shifted their weight directly beneath her. Emily's breath caught in her throat as a cold, moist draft slid up through the sheets. She wanted to scream, to thrash, to flee, but all she could do was stare wide-eyed at the ceiling. Then it came, a whisper rasping and wet, from the darkness under the bed. "I'm still here." The words slithered into her ears, close enough to feel the breath on her skin. Her heart thundered, her throat tightened, and her eyes stung with tears. With one final surge, she broke free of the paralysis, gasping, clutching the sheets to her chest. She sat frozen for the rest of the night, staring at the shadowed floor, praying the voice wouldn't speak again. Emily couldn't take the bedroom anymore. The thought of lying above that thing, hearing it breathe, waiting for it to touch her again, made her skin crawl. So she dragged her blanket and pillow to the living room, curling up on the sagging couch. For the first time in days, she felt a shred of safety, convincing herself the open space, far from the bed, would protect her. She left the lamp glowing, its light flickering faintly against the walls, and tried to rest. Hours passed in uneasy silence until the clock read 3:07 a.m. That was when she heard it, the unmistakable sound of dragging, long, deliberate footsteps pulling across the floorboards. The noise came from her bedroom, slow and patient, before moving closer. Emily's throat tightened as the sound grew louder, approaching the couch. She clutched the blanket, her breath shallow, frozen in place. The steps stopped directly beneath her, though there was no bed here, no frame for anything to hide under. And yet she felt it, the same cold breath rising from below, chilling her legs. Emily whimpered, covering her mouth, her heart pounding as the floor beneath her seemed to groan with weight. It had followed her. No matter where she slept, it was still underneath. The next morning, Emily stormed back to Mrs. Calloway's apartment, her face pale and sleepless, her voice trembling as she blurted out, "It followed me, even in the living room. I don't know what to do." The old woman studied her for a long moment, then sighed as if weighing whether to share something long buried. She motioned Emily inside and closed the door. The air smelled of stale tea and mothballs, but Emily barely noticed. Mrs. Calloway lowered her voice to a near whisper. "Years ago, before you moved in, a man went missing in this building. Lived right in your unit. Young, quiet, never caused trouble. One night, he simply vanished. Police searched, tore the place apart, but they never found a body. Neighbors swore they heard him screaming the night before, muffled, like it came from under the floor." Emily's blood ran cold. "You think that's what's under my bed?" she asked. Mrs. Calloway's eyes narrowed. "I don't think it's him anymore. Whatever's there, it wears his shape. Tenants who lasted long enough said it wasn't human." Too long. Too wrong. Emily swallowed hard, her hands trembling. Why hasn't anyone stopped it? The woman only shook her head. "Because it doesn't let go." Emily lasted 2 more nights before her dread turned to desperation. Armed with a flashlight, she sat on the edge of her bed, heart hammering as the clock struck midnight. She told herself she had to see it, had to know she wasn't losing her mind. Slowly, she leaned over, lowering the beam of light into the darkness beneath. At first, she saw only dust, shadows stretching unnaturally against the wall. Then her breath caught. 2 eyes gleamed back at her, black and wet, reflecting the light like a predator's. Her hand shook as she adjusted the beam, and the shape revealed itself. A face, but not one meant to exist. The skin sagged in strange folds, the jaw stretched too wide, teeth small and sharp, lined all the way back into the shadows. Its body seemed compressed, twisted in ways bones shouldn't bend, yet it moved with fluid ease, curling closer to the edge of the bed. Emily's chest seized when it smiled, a grotesque imitation of something human. Then, in a voice that scraped like rusted metal, it whispered her name, "Emily." She gasped, jerking back, the flashlight clattering to the floor, plunging the room into darkness. And in that darkness it laughed. After that night, Emily unraveled. Sleep became impossible, every shadow in her apartment a threat. She jumped at the hum of the fridge, flinched at the pipes groaning, her nerves stretched so thin she felt like a string ready to snap. When she did drift off, the creature invaded her dreams, wearing the faces of people she loved. Her mother's soft voice calling her name, her best friend's laugh echoing through the dark, only to twist into that same grotesque grin, eyes black and bottomless. During the day, she caught herself glancing under tables, checking closets, unable to shake the crawling sense that it was with her, even in the sunlight. She muttered to herself in mirrors, trying to convince her reflection she was still sane. But the nights were worst. The whispers grew bolder, clearer, no longer random sounds but words that taunted her. "You can't leave. You're mine now." Sometimes it spoke in her own voice, repeating her thoughts back to her before she'd even spoken them. The boundary between her mind and its presence began to blur, and Emily found herself gripping her hair, begging in a hoarse whisper, "Get out of my head!" But the laughter that followed told her it never would. The breaking point came on a storm-heavy night. Rain lashed against the windows, thunder rolling through the sky, but even the storm couldn't drown out the sound of it shifting under her bed. Emily lay frozen, every nerve on fire, as the mattress dipped. This time it wasn't hiding. She heard the scrape of its nails on the floorboards, then the slow stretch of limbs unfolding where no space should exist. The sheets tightened against her legs, as if something had hooked them. Trembling, she reached for her phone, flicking on the flashlight with shaking fingers. The beam landed on the floor just as it emerged. Its head came first, tilting at an unnatural angle, jaw unhinged in that grotesque smile. Shoulders and arms dragged out next, bending in ways that cracked and popped. Emily couldn't breathe. She pressed against the wall, heart pounding as it crawled toward her, each movement deliberate, savoring her terror. Its face came inches from hers, the stench of rot filling her nose. In a voice stitched from dozens of whispers, it murmured, "Closer now." Emily screamed, her body finally breaking free of paralysis. But the sound was swallowed by thunder as the creature kept coming, relentless, unstoppable. Emily bolted from the bed, her bare feet slapping against the floor as she lunged for the door, but the creature was faster. Something cold and jagged wrapped around her ankle, yanking her off balance. She crashed hard to the floor, her scream splitting the silence as her nails scraped uselessly against the wood. The thing dragged her backward, inch by inch, toward the gaping shadows under the bed frame. "No! Let me go!" she sobbed, kicking wildly, her heel connecting with something soft that gave way with a sickening crack. The creature hissed, a guttural sound that vibrated through the floorboards, but its grip only tightened. Desperation surged. Her hands fumbled across the floor until her fingers brushed the phone she had dropped earlier. She grabbed it, the flashlight still weakly glowing, and turned it toward the monster. The beam caught its face, an impossible distortion of human features, grinning with shredded lips. It recoiled for just a second, enough for Emily to twist free, scrambling on all fours toward the door. Her sobs turned frantic as she slammed against it, clawing for the handle. Behind her, nails tore across the wood, closer, closer. The floor groaned under its weight as it surged forward again, refusing to let her escape. The door burst open just as Emily's hand slipped on the knob, her body trembling with exhaustion. Mrs. Calloway stood in the hallway, eyes wide, her frail frame shaking as she took in the scene. "Dear God," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Emily didn't waste a second. She threw herself into the neighbor's arms, sobbing, but the sound behind her was worse than any nightmare. The creature let out a low, guttural laugh, dragging itself halfway into the light. Its limbs were too long, its skin gray and slick as though it had never seen the sun. The thing tilted its head, watching them, lips pulled into that hideous grin. Mrs. Calloway gasped, clutching at a cross around her neck. "I told you not to speak of it," she hissed, backing away. Emily shook her head frantically, choking on her words. It won't stop! It followed me." For a heartbeat, the creature's black eyes flicked between them. Then it lunged forward, nails scraping across the floor, with a screech that made Emily's ears ring. But the moment Mrs. Calloway's trembling hand clutched Emily tighter, the thing froze. Slowly, as if retreating into the very fabric of the shadows, it slipped back under the bed, vanishing into silence. Emily left the apartment before the sun had even risen, throwing her belongings haphazardly into boxes and bags, not caring what she left behind. Mrs. Calloway watched silently from her doorway, her face pale with pity but offering no words of comfort. By mid-morning, Emily was gone, the keys dropped on the kitchen counter of that cursed apartment. Her new place was brighter, cleaner, with white walls and fresh paint that smelled of safety. For the first time in weeks, she felt like she could breathe. That night, she sank into her new bed, exhaustion pulling her under. No creaks, no whispers, no shadows pressing too close. Just silence. She smiled weakly, whispering to herself, "It's over. It's finally over." Sleep came quickly, deeper than she'd dared to hope for. But sometime after midnight, she stirred. At first, she thought it was part of a dream, the soft rhythm of breath filling her ears. Then she froze. The sound wasn't hers. Slow, deliberate, drawn-out exhalations rose from beneath the mattress. Her blood turned cold as her eyes widened in the dark. And then, from under the bed, that same rasping whisper crawled into the silence. "Did you miss me?" Emily's scream never left her throat. And so the story ends, or at least, that's what Emily thought when she fled. But evil doesn't fade with distance, and shadows don't stay behind locked doors. Sometimes they follow, sometimes they wait. The next time you slip into bed alone in the silence, listen closely. If the room feels colder than it should, if the mattress shifts ever so slightly beneath you, ask yourself one question. Are you sure you're the only one there? After all, some things don't live under the bed. They wait for you, patient and smiling, in the dark where you can't see.